To celebrate Native American Heritage Day, I'd like to share something special with you. Many of you probably don't know this, but I am part Native American. I am a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, the third largest Native American nation in the United States. The Choctaw tribe originates from the Mississippi area, but despite their early alliances with the Americans, they were among the first to be forcibly relocated during the Indian Removal Act and marched on the Trail of Tears to a reservation in Oklahoma. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Trail of Tears, I urge you to learn more about it. I hope this video and illustration tutorial are a starting point for that. It's important for me to carry the Choctaw history and way of life forward, so I have chosen to recreate the Great Seal of the Choctaw Nation to pay tribute to my heritage. The symbolism in this graphic encompasses the history and values of the Choctaw people. While I walk you through creating this seal in vector format using Adobe Illustrator, I'll also share some facts about the historical importance of the design. Before I begin illustrating, I'll just briefly mention some of what makes me proud to be Choctaw. The Choctaw Nation has a strong emphasis on growth, prosperity, and culture. There are a wide range of programs for Choctaw members, including access to food, affordable housing, healthcare, self-sustainability, education, career growth, and more. One program I am currently involved with is a seed sharing initiative where I'm able to grow traditional Choctaw plants. Here's a Choctaw sweet potato squash that I grew. This year I also harvested a lot of lamb's quarter, which is an edible shrub with seeds that can be used to make a grain dish. It feels good to learn how to grow food, but it's even more meaningful to me to learn how to propagate plants that are culturally relevant to me. I appreciate that these resources are available to me, and I hope my tutorial will be helpful for anyone who wants to learn about Choctaw culture, in addition to how to make art in vector format. For reference, I will be looking at an original of the current Choctaw seal, though there are a couple of different versions I found online. I'm going with the one that comes from ChoctawNation.com. I won't be trying to copy the seal exactly, but I'll get it really close. If you are Choctaw and you'd like access to this vector file, just send me an email. This is sort of a long tutorial, so let's get right into it. Here inside of Adobe Illustrator, I'm working on a square canvas. Since this seal has a lot of circles, let's go ahead and just map things out starting with the ellipse tool. If I hold Shift while drawing the circle, that will constrain it to a perfect circle. I'll make one very large circle for the outer ring. Then I'll select the black arrow tool, and I can use this just to move the circle up and try to center it. If we want everything to be perfectly centered as we build this, we'll want to go to the Align panel, and for the reference point of the alignment, we'll want to set that to the artboard. Now if we center this horizontally and vertically, it's going to be perfectly centered on the canvas. Before we get too far in, let's go ahead and just save our progress. I'll just save this as an Adobe Illustrator file. Next, I'll select that circle, and I'll go to Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste in Place. This will duplicate the circle, and if I hover over the corner point here, I can scale that second circle down. If I hold Shift and Alt while I scale it, I can scale it from the center while keeping it in proportion. And this will allow me to create the next ring, which is the blue ring with the text. I know these lines look really thin right now, but we'll go ahead and fill them in with a proper thickness and color later. I just want to get the basic layout of where each ring is. You don't need to stress too much about it being perfectly in proportion because we can adjust all of this later. I'll go ahead and make a copy of that ring. I'll just use the keyboard shortcuts to copy and paste. I'll scale that one down, and then I'll repeat that process for yet another ring. So I have one ring for that outer rope pattern, the next ring is for the blue strip that has the text in it, the third ring is for the smaller rope, and the fourth ring is for the yellow circle in the center. Next I'll use the black arrow tool to drag a selection across all four of the rings. In the swatches panel, I'll select the fill and make that no fill. Then I'll toggle over to the stroke and I'll make that sort of this bluish green color. If you're unable to find any of these panels, they can all be found in the window menu if you scroll down. In the stroke panel, I'll increase the width of that stroke, just to approximate the width of that outer ring. I'll select the next ring and I'll make that blue and much thicker. Then I can transform it while holding Shift and Alt to make it larger and fit closer to that green ring. I'll select those next two rings and scale them down so they fit better in the center. And then I'll make the outer one green, and of course a little bit thinner. I'll transform it into position. And then I'll select that final ring, switch to the fill and make it yellow, and then disable the stroke. I'll transform that one to fit, and we have the basic layout of the rings on the seal. These are all on a single layer, so I'll go ahead and name that layer background. And if I create a new layer above that, that'll help us keep the basic elements of our composition separate from each other. By locking and unlocking these layers, we can ensure that we don't accidentally select things that we don't intend to select. Let's go ahead and add the text next. I'll select the Type tool, choose black for my fill color, and the type of type tool that I want is Type on a Path. We'll first need a path, so I'll select the Ellipse tool. And while holding Shift and Alt, I can draw a perfect circle from the center. It's of course not going to be centered yet till we center it using the Align panel, but just try to get it more or less in the right place. Because this is just a path for the text, it doesn't need a stroke or fill color, so don't worry about that. But do make sure to go to the Align panel and make sure that it's perfectly centered. With the Type on a Path tool selected, I can click on that path, and now my text will flow around that shape. Let's go to the Paragraph panel, and let's go ahead and choose to center this. That will flip the text upside down, so we'll need to select the black arrow, hover over the corner point to rotate. Holding Shift will snap it to specific angle increments, and just flip it around to the top side. Next, let's open the Character Type panel, and here we can select a larger font size. Again, we can adjust this later. Don't worry about whether or not it fits inside of that blue ring, we'll fix that in a moment as well. Let's choose a different font. I can't guarantee you're going to have all these fonts on your end, but if you have access to Adobe Creative Cloud, then you might be able to find these fonts on their website. This one looks pretty close to me. I will make it bolder though, using the Character panel. Now I'll need to select the black arrow tool and transform the path that the text is on to fit inside of this blue area. Now I'll create another elliptical shaped path, make sure it's centered, use the Type on Path tool to click on that path to add text to it, and then add the bottom half of my text. I'll double click on the Type on a Path tool, and this will give me the option to flip the text. After flipping, I'll rotate the text so that it's in the proper position at the bottom of the seal. Now that the text is separate from the background, I can use the lock icons to keep one layer from interfering with the others. I'll go ahead and lock the text layer since I only want to be able to select the background layer. And I'll scale that larger outer ring a little bit larger because I see that I need to make that blue ring a lot wider. I'll need to transform that text path as well to make sure it's centered. And I'll adjust the inner ring and circle as well. I think that's coming along pretty well so far. That was the easy stuff. Now we're going to move on to something that's a little more challenging, and that is creating that rope pattern that goes around the outer and inner green rings. To do that, we're going to create a pattern brush. So let's create a new layer above everything else. I'll select the ellipse shape tool, and I'll just draw a long oval that has a black stroke. Under the pen tool, I'll select the anchor point tool, and if I click on both these endpoints, I can turn them from curves into sharp points. Next, I'll select the curvature pen tool, and this will allow me to bend the sides of this shape. I'll place a point in the top right and in the bottom left and just move it in a bit. Now bring the points in a bit more to create sort of an S shape. I suppose you could use a grid or something to try to get it very precise, but I'm just going to eyeball it because that should be good enough. I'll move this top center point over a bit, and I think that will work for now. We can always adjust this later to get it looking perfect. I'm going to rotate the shape a bit to make it diagonal. Then I will hold Alt and drag away from the shape while holding Shift, and this will allow me to duplicate that layer while keeping it constrained perfectly on that horizontal axis. If I do that again, then I can start to create a repeating pattern. I think it looks pretty good so far, so I'm going to shrink it down and just extend it a bit more. When I do this, I'll also need to decrease the stroke weight a bit. I'll select all three of those layers and hold Alt and Shift to duplicate them again. If I decrease the stroke weight a bit more, we can see what that ought to look like. I think it's going in the right direction, but it needs a little bit more work. I'll remove all but one of those shapes, and I'll go ahead and just give it a green fill. We'll be repeating this shape to create our brush, So I'll go to the window menu and I'll open the brushes panel. Let's go ahead and just move this over so it's in its own space. With that shape selected, I can click here in the bottom of this panel to create a new brush. The option I want to choose is Pattern Brush, and then I'll click OK. I'll give this brush a name, and I'll click on OK. Now we can go ahead and just test this to see if it even works. I'll unlock the background layer, and I'll select that outer green ring. Then I'll click on that pattern brush in the Brushes panel to apply it. Because of how this shape repeats, there's a gap in between each of the shapes. This is really easy to fix. First, we'll go ahead and decrease the stroke weight a bit. Then we'll copy that ring and paste it in place to duplicate it, and simply rotate those shapes to bridge the gaps. I think that worked really well, and that was much easier than having to draw that by hand, but I think I'm going to tweak it just a little bit more to make it look just a bit better. I'm going to undo, and then I'll select that shape I used to create the pattern and I'll rotate it just a bit more. I'll create a new pattern brush from that and just give it a different name. And now let's try applying that to the ring, making the stroke width smaller, copying it and pasting it in place to duplicate it, and then rotating it to fill those gaps. To me, that looks a little more accurate, so I think I like that better. We shouldn't need that pattern shape anymore, but rather than delete it, let's just go ahead and hide that layer in case we need to access it later. I'll unlock the text layer so that I can select everything and just scale it down a bit so it fits on the artboard. Next, I'll select that inner green ring and I'll apply that pattern to that as well. Of course, I'll need to scale the stroke width a bit smaller. I'll create a new layer for those called ropes. Then I'll use the arrow tool to make a selection of the ropes, and then drag to the right of the layer in the layers palette to move that content to the new layer. Now those ropes will be separate. I'll go ahead and lock the ropes layer. I'll transform the text to make sure it's better centered inside the blue ring. I'll do the same for the yellow circle as well. Now I'd like to correct the colors of the rope a bit. Instead of black, it should be dark brown. The easiest way to do this is to unlock the rope layers, select them, and then go to Edit, Edit Colors, Recolor Artwork. In the bottom of this panel, I'll click on Advanced Options. Then I'll click to the right of the black color, click on Yes, then click on that swatch to change it to dark brown. I'll click on OK, and now that color has been changed throughout the rope. I'll repeat that once more to slightly tweak that green color within the rope. As you can see, I can move these sliders to really fine-tune that color. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because we can always change this later. I'll change the color of that blue ring as well because originally I just chose the default swatch colors. I'm not going for an exact replica here, so it's okay if they're slightly off. I'm going to select the bottom text path next and just make sure that's centered as well. Because the two text paths are overlapping, you may need to open up that layer group and then select them individually there. I'll make sure the top text is still centered as well. Now let's draw the ornaments that separate the text. I'll lock the other layers and create a new layer called Circles. Then I'll select the Ellipse Shape tool, and I'll draw a circle that has no fill and a black stroke. I'll increase the thickness of the stroke a bit. Then I'll hold Alt and drag on that circle to create a duplicate. I'll use this one as my spare. I'll duplicate one of those circles again, move it diagonally down to the left, and then create another duplicate diagonally down to the right to create sort of a triangle shape. I'll select all three of these circles, and I'll distribute them evenly by aligning them to a selection and then choosing to distribute from the vertical axis. I'll create another couple of duplicates and I'll place them next to each other. These ones won't be overlapping like the top example. I'll make another two duplicates and stack them vertically and place them over to the left. Then select those two duplicates and duplicate those and move them to the right. I'll select the top two and duplicate those and move them to the bottom, and now we get sort of a ring shape. I'll move the bottom set up just a bit more by nudging it into place. I'll also nudge the left and right sets of circles just to make the overall shape rounder. Then I'll select the Ellipse Shape tool again and draw a larger ellipse that fills in that center area and overlaps the other circles without going outside of them. I'll select all of that. With the smaller circles grouped together, I'll center them vertically and horizontally on that larger center circle. And then I'll go to the Pathfinder panel and choose Unite. That fuses all of those circles together into a single shape. The inside corners of that shape are a little bit imperfect, so to fix that, we'll go to the stroke panel, and under Align Stroke, we'll align the stroke to the outside of the shape. Next, we'll return to the top 3 circles. I'll nudge the center circle down just a bit more. Then I'll select those circles and the shape beneath it. I'll choose my color sampler tool, and I'll click on that blue ring to fill them with that same color. I want the fill to be that blue color, and I want them to have a black stroke. I'll also need to select that center circle and go to Object, Arrange, Bring to Front. I noticed that when I applied that thicker stroke, it messed up the corner points in the center of that bottom circular shape, so I'll need to select that and round the corners from the stroke panel. I'll move those top 3 circles closer to the bottom design. Then I'll duplicate a couple of those filled circles and move them to either side of the floral shape. I'll select the center 3 circles as well as the floral shape, and I'll make sure that they're aligned. Then I'll group the 3 circles with the center, select everything together, and then make sure that it's distributed evenly. That'll center those design elements with each other. If I double click on that group, I can isolate it. I'll select those top 3 circles, copy and paste them in place to duplicate them, then rotate them to flip them upside down. I'll move that shape down to the bottom. Holding Shift will keep it constrained on that axis. I think that looks pretty good, so I'll double click outside of those shapes to exit the isolation mode. I'll select all of the circle shapes and group them together. I'll select that spare circle that I don't need anymore and delete it. Then I'll select that design, scale it down while holding Shift so that I don't distort it, and move it approximately where I want it. Now that it's smaller, I'll need to reduce the width of the stroke. I'll rotate it to the correct angle, scale it down a bit more, adjust the stroke width again, and maybe go back into isolation mode and just adjust that center floral shape to make it a bit smaller. I'll exit out of isolation mode and move it over to center it. Once it's in a pretty good position, I'll hold Alt and drag while holding Shift to duplicate it, then go to Object, Transform, Reflect, and reflect it vertically to mirror it. I'll make sure it's centered and then deselect. I think that's looking pretty good. You'll notice sometimes I zoom out really small to evaluate my work. It often makes it easier to see mistakes if you view your work at different sizes. Next, I'll unlock the text layer, and on the top text, I'll increase the spacing between the letters a bit. After that, I'll adjust the decorative spacers between the 2 lines of text, and I'll just rotate the top line of text a bit just to make it fit better aesthetically. I'll tweak those decorative separators just a bit more just to make sure they're more centered. And then I'll lock the circle and text layers, create a new layer above the circles. I'll name the layer Pipe, and we can begin to construct the design that's in the center of the seal. I'll zoom in more closely, and I'll start by drawing a shape with the rectangle tool. I want this shape to have no fill and a black stroke, and I'll draw a long, skinny rectangle. It'll take some effort to get the proportions right. You certainly don't have to get it right the first time because you can edit all of these layers. I'll make it a bit shorter to leave room for the mouthpiece. I'll use the white arrow tool to select these nodes on the end, and one at a time I'll just nudge them inward. I'm making sure to keep track of how many times I nudge it. That way I can do the same amount on the other side. If your nudging is moving too fast or too slow, you can always adjust that in the preferences. Next, I'll use that same tool to select both of the nodes on the left side, and by dragging those circle icons, I can round those corners as much as I like. I'll go ahead and just make it completely round on the end. I'll round the right side as well, but not quite as much, so it's more of a rounded rectangle. Next, I'll select that layer and I'll duplicate it by copying and pasting it. Then I'll scale it smaller and drag it to the right to create the mouthpiece. I'll select both of those layers and I'll fill them with this reddish color. Then I'll select the mouthpiece and I'll go to Object, Arrange, and send it to the back. I'll select the rectangle tool once more, and I'll draw a small vertical rectangle on the left side. I'll drag those dots to round it off as well. Then I'll draw another rectangle for the bowl or the area where you place the tobacco. I'll select those corner points one at a time and nudge them inward to make it tapered on the bottom. Then I'll make sure that it's centered and it's about the right proportion. Again, I can adjust this later. I'll use the white arrow tool to select this shape and round the bottom corners just a bit. Then I'll round the top as well. After that, I'll create an ellipse that is very flat horizontally, and I'll use that to create an opening at the top of the pipe. I can fill this with black to make it look hollow, and just make sure to flatten it enough to where it fits into the correct perspective. Just keep in mind if you adjust one of these pieces, the other one will have to be adjusted as well. If this part of the pipe is too slender, you can always make it wider. One way to do it is to use the white arrow tool to select the top part of the layers. I'm leaving those bottom nodes unselected. And then look for the scale tool. If you drag with this tool, you can reshape both layers at once and make it a little bit broader. I'll return to the rectangle tool and I'll draw the bottom part of the pipe, which is the hatchet end. This will just be another skinny vertical rectangle. The top end should be about as thick as the pieces above it. I'll select each of the bottom nodes with the white arrow tool and flare them outward. Again, be sure to count how many times you nudge in one direction so that you do the same amount on the other to keep it symmetrical. I'll use the black arrow tool to move that piece up to where it fits into the pipe. The area where these two pieces fit together will be in shadow anyways. And next I'll move that layer to the background so that it's overlapped by the piece above it. After that, I'll use the curvature pen tool to add a center point that I'll drag down to make it look curved. Then I'll tweak the position and proportions a bit just to get it looking a little bit more accurate. After that, I'll enlarge it and center it a bit more on the canvas. I want to make sure to leave room for the other elements as well. Next, let's add the smoke. I'm going to be using a drawing tablet along with the blob brush tool, and this will allow me to draw exactly what I want. If you don't have a drawing tablet, you can use the curvature pen tool for this, but the drawing tablet will make it a lot faster and more intuitive. As you can see, I can vary my pen pressure to get thicker or thinner lines, which makes it really easy to draw this smoke. I'm not trying to copy this smoke shape exactly because I didn't want to trace this, so I'll just be making my own smoke pattern here that closely resembles the original. If I did want it to be precise, I could overlay the original on top of this and just make sure to trace it exactly, but I don't really care to do that. I'll zoom in more closely just to make sure I didn't miss any spots, and if I did, I'll be sure to paint over them. And then I'll select all of the smoke and go to Object, Path, Simplify. I'm going to simplify this just a bit, just to remove any edges that are maybe too lumpy or too sharp, but don't do it too much or you'll ruin all of your nice detail. I can also select the Smooth tool and paint over some of those edges just to smooth them out in specific areas. It can be helpful to press Ctrl-H to hide your selection edges. That'll make them easier to see. You can bring them back again with Ctrl-H. If any of these tools are missing from your toolbar, you can always find all of the tools in this menu down at the bottom. The tool I want here is the Pucker tool. I'll double-click on the tool to view the options, and I'll want to reduce the width and height quite a bit. I'll paint near the tips of the smoke to sharpen it up a bit. Then I'll smooth a bit more with the Smooth tool. I have those smoke layers grouped together, so I'll go ahead and double-click on the group to enter isolation mode, and I'll just adjust this piece of it to bring it in closer. I'll move these pieces around as well. Next, I'll zoom in closely and I will create a new layer above the pipe called Pipe Hatching. I'll use this to draw some hatching and lines on the pipe to give it detail. I'll use the blob brush again so I can draw these lines more easily. If you don't like how you did a line, just do an undo and try again. I'm not trying to copy the reference image exactly, I'm just trying to get the impression more or less, so I'm not going to worry about exactly how many lines I put on this. If your pen pressure is not varying your line width, you can double-click on the blob tool to see the options, and here you can see sizes linked to pressure and you can control the amount of variation. I'll continue adding hatching to the pipe, loosely following the reference image. I'll zoom out to see how it looks, and I think that looks pretty good. The next element we'll work on are the 3 arrows. I'll select the Line tool, create a new layer for arrows, and draw a line to create the shaft of the arrow. I'll add some thickness to it. Then I'll select the Polygon tool, and just click once on the canvas to see the properties. I'll change the number of sides to 3, and then click OK. This creates a triangle. I'll rotate the triangle and elongate it to the right. I'll select the curvature pen and I'll add a couple of points near the tip. Then I'll nudge the top one up and the bottom one down to create sort of a curvature to the arrowhead. Under the pen tool, I'll select the Add Anchor Point tool. and I'll click in the center of the left side. This creates a point that I can nudge to the right to create sort of a V shape. I'll click on those points with the anchor point tool to sharpen them, and now we have a nice arrowhead shape. Since I'm just making this up as I go along, sometimes I have to redo elements, and this is one of them. It's definitely an arrowhead shape, but it doesn't match the reference image close enough. Let's just go ahead and go with this shape for now, but I'll come back to it later and change it. I'll scale it down and move it into place, and then I'll give it a red fill. I'll select the entire arrow and scale it down. I'll select the rectangle tool and add a long horizontal rectangle to the back end of the arrow. Then I'll use the Add Anchor Point tool to add a point to the center on the left and nudge it to the right. I'll do the same thing on the right side as well. Then I'll just make sure that the arrow parts are centered by aligning them and adjust their proportions. I'll select that line layer and just move the left side of it out past the arrow a bit. I'll also move the arrowhead a little bit farther out and extend the shaft to connect to it. Next, I'll select the blob brush tool again and I'll draw a horizontal line along this shape to divide it in half. Then I'll select that bent rectangle shape, and I'll go to Object Expand, and I'll expand the fill and the stroke. The stroke will no longer be editable in the same way, but now I can use the eraser tool to take some notches out of it, making it look like a feather. I'll zoom in, and then I'll round some of those edges just to make them look more aerodynamic on the right side. Now let's fix the arrowhead. I want to just start with a completely new shape, so I'm going to draw a tall ellipse, give it a red fill and a black stroke that's approximately the same thickness as the other arrowhead I drew. Then I'll select the scissors tool and I'll cut it in half by clicking right on those two left and right nodes. I'll select the bottom half and I'll delete it. If I move that down a bit and then select the anchor point tool, I can click on that top node to sharpen it. I'll transform that whole layer to make it skinnier and taller. And now I have a much better curve for my arrowhead. I'll connect that bottom line by going to Object, Path, Join. And then I'll use the Add Anchor Point tool to add an anchor point to the middle and push that middle bottom node upward. I'll rotate it and put it into place, and now we have a much better looking arrow. I'll adjust it a bit just to try to get the proportions a little more accurate. It doesn't have to be perfect because we can still tweak it later. But while the arrow is horizontal, it's much easier to keep it aligned, so you'll want to make any major changes while it's like this. You could also duplicate the arrow and then hide one of the duplicates just so you always have your original to go back to. I'll move the arrow up into place and rotate it. Then I'll enter isolation mode and I'll make the shaft of the arrow just a little bit thinner. I'll rotate it a little bit more and move it right about where I want it. And I know I keep saying this, but don't worry about it being perfect because we can adjust it later. As I mentioned, it does become harder to keep this arrow aligned, but you can tweak it a little bit as you can see here. I'll zoom out a bit, and I think the arrow shaft needs to be just a hair thicker, so I'll fix that. I'll copy that arrow and paste it in place to duplicate it, and then I'll rotate that duplicate and try to get it into the right position. I'll make another duplicate, and I'll put that in between the other two arrows. Now I'll select the entire symbol in the middle, and I'll scale it down and center it a bit more. Some of the lines on the pipe need to be a bit thicker, so I'll select those layers and just increase the stroke width a bit. Then I'll select all of the arrows and just adjust their size and position a bit. Now I'm ready to create the bow. I'll select the ellipse tool and draw an ellipse. I'll make sure that doesn't have a fill. Then I'll duplicate the shape and overlap the two shapes while keeping them centered. I'll scale both of them down to make them a little flatter. Then I'll select the bottommost of the two shapes and I'll move it down to space it out a bit. Then scale it from the side while holding Alt and Shift, and that will scale it from the center while keeping the proportions. I'll select both of those shapes, then go to the Pathfinder panel and choose Exclude. I'll double click on those layers to enter isolation mode. Then I'll select that bottom section and press backspace to delete it. That leaves us with a rough bow shape. I can use the white arrow tool to select the center nodes and move them upward, and that will bend the bow more. Next, I'll select the curvature pen, and I'll click beneath that bow shape, not too close to it because I don't want to add to it, and I'll draw in the string for the bow. This bow is unstrung, so the string can be kind of loose and floppy. Again, I'm not going to try to copy the exact shape from the original. I'll end the line by pressing Escape, and then click on each of the endpoints and just move them closer to the bow. If you like, you can use the curvature pen tool to adjust those points and add or remove them as needed. Next, I'll select the white arrow tool, and I'll select those center nodes and just bend it a bit more. Then I'll select the black arrow tool, I'll group the bow and the string together, then enter isolation mode, select just the bow, and give it a red fill. I'll move it into place, and then I need to move the string behind the pipe. So to do that, I'll create a couple of new layers, one above and one below, and I'll separate the string and the bow onto those layers. I'll lock all the layers except for the bow layers, and then I'll select the bow and the string, and I'll rotate it into its approximate position. I'll move it and scale it down a bit so it fits within the circle shape, and I think that's looking pretty good so far. I'll select the curvature pen and select the ends of the bow and just curve them down a bit more to bend the bow. Then of course I'll need to select the endpoints of the bow string and just move those into place so they connect to the bow. I'll also think about how it flows behind the pipe. I'll tweak the position and rotation of the bow a bit just to get it looking a little bit more accurate. And I'll move and rotate the smoke as well. Next I'll select the white arrow tool, click on one of the arrowheads, then hold Shift and click on the other two. I'll reduce the thickness of the stroke a bit. I'll center that center arrow just a bit more. Then I'll select the bow, and I'll round the caps on the end and make the corners rounded as well. This just cleans up the ends of the bow. I think I want to fix one of the arrows, and the best way to do that is to just delete the other two arrows, make the change, and then duplicate them again. I think that looks better. Next, I'll select the eraser tool, and I'll just clean up those arrows a little bit, just to shave off some of those sharp edges. It's okay if this makes them slightly less identical, it'll look more organic that way. The original Choctaw Nation seal has kind of a roughness to the lines, so I want to try to emulate that. I'll select the arrows, then I'll go to Effect, Distort and Transform, Roughen. If I roughen these just a bit, it gives me that sketchy appearance. This is a live effect, so it doesn't actually affect the shape of the layer, and you can disable it if you like. I'll roughen the bow, the pipe, and the rest of the arrows. When I roughen this arrow, it makes the back end of the shaft a little bit crooked, so I'm going to make this line shorter, and then draw the end of that line without any roughening. I'll roughen the hatching lines, and I can even roughen that rope border. You may need to play with the size and detail settings for each of these objects to make sure they have the right amount of roughening. I'll roughen those circle designs, the smoke, and even the text, the blue ring, and the yellow center circle. I think that gives it a really nice effect, and again, you can disable this effect if you'd prefer it to be more crisp. Next, I'd like to add a white drop shadow to the symbol in the center of the seal. I'll create a new layer above the background layer, and I'll call it Outline. I'll select white for my fill color, but before I do that, I want to try to make sure that most everything is just about how I want it, because if I change any of these elements, then I'll have to change the drop shadow again. I'll lock all the layers except for the pipe, and I'm going to adjust the bowl piece a bit. I'll make it a little bit taller. I'll also need to move the hatching lines and the smoke as well. Next, I'll isolate the pipe, and I'll go to the hatchet section of it and use the curvature pen to add a couple of points on the side, and then I'll move those in toward the center to curve the sides a bit. This little hatching line here doesn't look good anymore to me, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove it. Now I'll lock all the layers except for the symbol in the middle. I'll do a select all with Control A. I'll group those layers together. Then I'll copy and paste in place. I'll go to Object, Expand Appearance. I'll expand the fill and the stroke. Then I'll select the fill in the color panel and change everything to white. I'll fuse all those shapes together using Unite in the Pathfinder, and now we have this combined shape that we can use as the drop shadow. Now if I move that to the outline layer, I can use the black arrow tool to nudge it up and to the right to create a drop shadow. Just to bring that drop shadow in closer to the line art, I'll select the stroke, and I'll make that white. I'll increase the stroke weight a bit, and that just makes it look a little nicer. Next, I notice that those circle decorations don't look exactly as they should. I actually want the outer circles to be a bit larger than those inner circles. So I'll use the white arrow to select them all, then I'll use the black arrow to transform them to make them larger. I'll of course need to scoot them back into place. Next I'll go to the artboard tool and I'll expand the artboard a bit. Holding Shift and Alt will expand it from the center. I'll select both pieces of that outer rope shape, and I'll transform it to expand it a bit. I'll do the same thing for the blue ring as well and just make it a bit thicker. Now I'll need to adjust the text to make sure that that's still centered, and I'll need to adjust those circular designs as well. I'll unlock the layers for that center symbol, and I'll just move it down a bit to make sure it's more centered. Next I'll fix that outer ring a bit because it looks like I might have accidentally squished it when I was transforming it. So I'll just make sure to squish it back so that there's an equal amount of gap between that and the blue ring all the way around. Next I'll select the bow and I'll increase the thickness of the stroke surrounding it a bit. I want the bottom side to be thicker than the top side to create sort of a shadow. So I'll duplicate the bow by copying it and pasting it in back. Then I'll move it down a bit. If I show and hide it, you can see the effect that's having. I'll go ahead and just use the Pathfinder to unite that into a single shape, and I'll make sure that it has a black fill and stroke. I'll want to thicken the stroke on the tomahawk part of the pipe as well. Next I'll select those dividing lines on the back ends of the arrows, and I'll use the white arrow tool just to make those longer so they go all the way to the end. I'll also thicken them up a bit by surrounding them with a bit of a black stroke. After that, I'll lock the pipe layer so that I can focus only on the hatching lines, and I'll move these lines down just a bit. I'll hide that white drop shadow because I want to do a little bit of work on the position of the arrows. Unfortunately, I'll have to redo that drop shadow. I'll fix the alignment of the arrows, and then I'll recreate that white drop shadow using the same steps I used earlier. I'll select all those symbol shapes, copy them, paste them in place, expand them, make them white, and then move them into position. And those, of course, will be on the outline layer beneath the symbol. Next, I'll need to make sure that both sides of the font are a consistent size, so I'll match the exact font size and then scale them to fit and be centered. After that, I'll need to move those circular designs to make those centered as well. I'll make a few final tweaks to the color just to get it looking a little bit more accurate. And with that, we have a finished illustration. Again, I wasn't going for an exact replica here, otherwise I would have just traced it. I wanted to demonstrate how you can illustrate this from scratch. So while it's not 100% accurate, it's maybe 95, 96% accurate. And that's good enough for me. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I'll see you next time.